Good evening and welcome to Light Bytes. Thank you for joining us. This is our December edition. Thank you for taking the time on a Friday night to join us. We are once again broadcasting live from the Playhouse in London with our live studio audience. Hey, big cheers from the crowd. There we go. Thank you very much. And I'm also joined on stage with our panelists. And we are talking about lighting for festive trails. I will introduce everybody in a second. Before I get around to that, just a couple of things. First of all, in case you're wondering about the bow tie, I lost a bet. So I just need to, do that just to sort of really put that out there. People say I'm not in the Christmas spirit. Well, there we go. So thank you all for joining us. And a couple of things, if you're new to Light Bytes and our WebEx platform, we have muted your cameras and microphones just to save ourselves a little bit of bandwidth. But other than that, please feel free to chat to us in the chat window, pop any questions you have for either myself or the panelists into the Q&A, and we will get to those as we go through. So if you are not seeing the chat window, if you wiggle the mouse bottom of your screen, little menu bar should pop up, the little chat icon will be there. There's three little dots, click on that, and the Q&A option lives under that menu. So feel free to get in touch and chat to our panelists. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to everyone. I'll just work around the room. We have Tom Tomkins, Dom Cook, and our talking head on the screen is Tony Simpson. Tony unfortunately wasn't able to join us tonight, so we are, thanks to the marvels of technology, we're still able to have you in the room. So thank you all for being here with us. I appreciate you taking the time. We have all recently just come off Christmas trails. In fact, Tony, you were saying you have one that opens tonight, the last one of yours. So before we get into it, just a quick whiz around, say hello, who you are, background, etc., etc. And again, I'll just work this way. Tom, over to you.
Hey, I'm Tom Tomkins. I'm a project manager at White Light. I've been lighting Christmas trails for about 4 years. I started Christmas at Bewley down in Southampton, and I've been at Bedgebury for the past 3 years.
Brilliant. Dom.
Hello, I'm Dom. I just do the one Christmas trail a year, Christmas at Stourhead. For the last 2 years, I've been working with Tony at Stourhead, just looking after all elements of lighting, kind of work in theatre, live events and corporate. So Christmas, I suppose, is a little bit of an anomaly. I don't usually do that all year round, but it does take a big chunk of my year, especially towards the end of it. But it's certainly one of the more fun ones of the year to do.
Brilliant, thank you. And Tony, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my name is Tony Simpson. I'm a freelance lighting designer. I've been lighting for about 29 years, and I do some work in feature film, corporate, big background in theatre, and I got involved with this particular company and lighting Christmas trails about 6 years ago, doing their press photography shoots for them when I was a then full-time project manager at White Light. And I then started lighting Christmas trails in 2018, 4 years ago in Bewley. And then I've been working since then at Stourhead. This year I took on a multiple portfolio practice of basically lighting one site as my main site and then 5 other sites remotely with a head of lighting that I put in place. So it's been 7 months work to get us to where we are now with them all open.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I will dig a little deeper into that, how you manage the multiple sites part. But just as sort of kicking it off, so you get the phone call, we're going to do a Christmas trail. What's your starting point? What's your first port of call? How do you sort of get into the thing?
Yeah, the first port of call with this particular company, and I suppose now is the time I think we can probably say we've all been working for a company called Culture Creative, who produce trails as a contractor to Raymond Gubbe, Sony Music. And the model of their particular trail, which sort of sets them apart really from other people who do it, is the fact they have a very interesting method of designing a trail and using artists' work. And they curate various artists that essentially they invite to submit a creation of a festive kind, a metal structure or any object really that's an art-based festive idea. And those are the sort of key standpoints that they essentially design a trail around. The trails are sort of a mile walk, one way, outside, obviously at night. And the real brief when I first started, essentially, lighting these, is the fact that the trail would be designed around these various elements of artistic content all the way around. And the lighting's job was to A, enhance these artist installation, and then B, join the dots, be able for us to see in an attractive but functional way to get us from the start to the finish. So there was essentially how you approach it. I think when I first started doing these, there was quite a simple way. It was, where does the trail start? Where does the trail end? Where are these objects on the trail? And then what have I got to work with? What is the landscape? Are there buildings? Are there trees? Is there nothing? Is it quite open? What's the geography? So certainly when I started at Bewley, there was there's the mansion house, but then there's quite an unattractive building in the National Military Museum. So that becomes the challenge. And the other thing to remember is there are no walls necessarily. There's no ceiling. There's no functional help anywhere. Everything you think you've then got to do, you've got to create a way of delivering it, whether it's on the floor, whether it's rigging of some kind. So your reaction is to the landscape, but also to these objects that we're lighting. And that's what sets, in my opinion, that's what sets the culture creative trails apart from others, is the fact that they have these quite substantial pieces of curated art within them.
Brilliant. So Dom, coming around from your side, so what's your sort of process into it, and how do you sort of navigate through the...
I suppose it's quite similar to a theatrical process in the way that I tackle it. Teddy gets the lists from White Light, our supplier, of what kit we're actually going to be able to play with this year. And from there, it gets distributed on a plan. Until I really have a lighting plan, I can't do any work in terms of preparing the project.
No pressure, Tony.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily, it's our third year doing that site, so I kind of know the basis of where things go anyway. So we start to look at kind of cabling, any specialist rigging we need to put in, anything that's going to be a bit unusual that year. We start looking at all of that and start putting a package together for Tony's lighting plan. Alongside that, we need to look at all the art installations as well, so providing them power and any special requirements they need, and actually any logistical things around the site. We start planning for all that and all the infrastructure to go in. So yes, quite a lot happens.
Fair enough. And Tom, your prep time on something like this, in an ideal world, because I appreciate sometimes there are accelerated schedules. So, at which point in the year does this sort of come onto your radar? And then, sort of walk us through that side of things.
This changes year on year, really. Sometimes I've been approached by Tony in sort of summertime saying, he starts walking me through his ideas, so I can then start, just getting an idea about what we're going to need to do to achieve that. Like he says, with all the specialist bits of, like he said, there's no walls, no ceilings. You've got to put everything in yourself. But usually I don't properly start until around October time, where I then start getting everything, all the information, so final lighting designs and production schedules from the PM, and just starting to get like some budgets of how many people I can get in, when we can get them in, just to make sure we can pull everything off in time.
And so Tony, coming back to you, in terms of your sort of design process, do you find you need to do any pre-visualization of stuff to sort of get ideas across? Or is there slightly more a kind of I'm going to do that tree and that building and that rock, and people just kind of have an idea of what that looks like? Because I know in theatre, I find it quite a hard thing to communicate what the sort of lighting is going to look like. How does that sort of change outdoors?
It's a very interesting question, and because the particular company that we're working for have now expanded very, very fast into light trails in North America. They started last year with one in Chicago. They have 5 now running concurrently in the United States. Their technical director has been able to deliver them complete and are to walk through 3D visualization. And interestingly enough, talking to the boss of the company we've all been working for, it's obviously something that I think that they're going to look to try and expand over here. To answer your question, yeah, I mean, ultimately what I tend to do is that for me, the best thing is as many site visits as you possibly can achieve, as early as you possibly can achieve them, to orientate yourself for the landscape. What is it? What am I working with in terms of the route and what's there? And then what I tend to do, which I found actually quite helpful, is once I've photographed it, just literally in Mac, I annotate text and arrows and sketches and drawings on top of the photograph. The reason I do that is that then if you're taking a photograph, for example, of a particular view, and then you're literally sketching on top of it with some text and an arrow and a pointing and a, this is what I'm going to do, it becomes quite a simple, it's a very analog 2D simple way of doing it. But actually, as soon as you show that to someone, you say, well, I'm going to put a light here and the beam will do that. And they go, oh, I see what you mean. So I've started to use that quite a lot as a quick, simple way of. It's also made me realise after all the years of designing in theatre how, yes, you could work with a 3D model. You know, you could work with a set design model. Certainly in the rehearsal room, you could, you know, take birdies or small lights in and work and try and describe what you were talking about. But it has made me realise actually over the years and years of doing theatre how much of a risk I've taken by walking into the theatre, and the first time we're actually really getting a grasp on the lighting is after that first focus, that's sitting down for lighting session 1. And how many people have gone, oh, I didn't realise it would look like this, until you're in the lighting session. And it sort of just made me realise that actually a lot of people over the years have gone, no, you know, I know what we'll do, it'll look fine, or this is the right way to go, etc. We need it to be green. And people have just trusted you because you're the lighting designer, they've just trusted you. I think in this particular style of work, though, being able to, I think the visualization route is going to become more of a necessity as a tool for everybody. That's the people working on it in terms of the production, what we're doing, one, but also being able to sell it to the people that we're working for in terms of ideas.
I mean, I found it tricky because for me, being outdoors, everything changed. So I know what a Parcan at 70% in Lee 119 at a 6-meter trim is going to look like. I know what that is. Put it outside up against a tree. I don't know what that is anymore, right? Yeah. And it was a real hard thing. And you're dealing with, which we'll come to in a second, but you're dealing with different light sources as well. And you know, they go, oh, we'll just put a spike light here, and you're going, okay, how bright is that? Like how, you know? So there's a lot of that, and I wonder how accurate previs can be, because the little bit of previs stuff that I've done is never really, I've found, accurate enough to go, bang, there we go. This is what it's gonna look like.
Well, to take your point, Declan, you're absolutely right. And I think the thing is this, is that, you know, the detractors or the naysayers about this type of work say, well, you're just putting lots of trees. Well, it's easy, isn't it? And actually, you could argue that it's straightforward, yes, to a point. But you're creating, the thing is, what we also have to remember, and I think this is where, unless you've done one of these before, it'll be interesting to see your full feedback, Declan, now having come through this experience that you've had, you know, this November, is actually what we're doing is we're not creating a show. We're not creating an end-on stand and stare moment in a Pross Arts theatre or a gig space or a comedy club or a concert hall. We're making a pass-through visitor experience that is experiential, that people's mood is completely also how they feel. If they've had a bad journey, did they get stuck in the car park? The mulled wine's really expensive. I don't like the marshmallow. It's melted all over my clothes. Ooh. Whatever. You know, actually, there's many other factors that start to play into the fact that they're walking through. You're not necessarily making a moment that you're going to go stop, stand, stare, assess. It's Chekhovian, lovely lighting. It's not. We're making a visitor experience that has a festive feel and a festive theme. And I think that your point about knowing what a Parcan looks like at a 6-meter trim in a blue, you know, we are site specific. work, it's also site reactive work. There is no point in some cases in saying, well, I'd love to do X, Y, and Z, because actually X, Y, and Z that you would normally theatre against a site isn't going to work against a 400-year-old oak tree. And so that's my point is that there's an enormous amount of this that's reactive to the environment. And the only way of knowing what is that 119 in a CP62 par put on the ground at the bottom pointing up the oak tree is to try it. Because who can know until you try it? But that's also what's happened to me this year, you know, with the challenges this year of finding power companies in time and how power is looked after. You know, our production manager was like, well, yeah, but our lighting designer doesn't put all of the lights on the plan. And when I turned around to him and said, yeah, you're right, I don't put all of the lights that we have in our inventory on the plan because I don't know yet where I'm going to use them all. For exactly the point I just made. That you can start with the plan, the lighting plan and the plot has to be your starting point, it has to be my educated opinion is this. But then it's going to be formulated and fleshed out by them getting there and going, actually, we could add 3 things here, not 1. Or I put 4 things there, we only need 2. It can go the other way. and that's what makes it a challenge, especially what Tom and Dom do in terms of the production side of the cabling, the thinking about power, the headroom on the distro, blah, blah, blah. Actually, it becomes a major challenge for the guys who are actually in charge of actually putting these systems together. Because then the lighting designer goes, oh, no, we need 5 here, not 1. And of course, they are really, really diligent. And they go, great, we'll get you the 5. But actually, they're walking away going, oh, God, he's made us put 5 there now. Again, I know. But it's actually quite challenging. So that's what I say about the naysayers. Oh, it's just like some trees. Yeah, it is, to a point. But it's actually quite a challenge. Factor in that the weather. Factor in that the temperature. Factor in that it's raining. And your distro's from a dodgier company than you've had before. And it starts tripping and you don't know why. You know, la, 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 la. The challenges that you suddenly get just to getting a light in the right place to make it work become really quite tricky. And it takes a bit of practice.
Absolutely. So you touched on, you know, stuff changing and stuff moving. So how do you guys, because obviously you know that's going to happen, right? You've both done these trails before. It's inevitable. Like Tony says, something's going to change. And also it can change right at the last minute, right? On a client walkthrough, they can go, oh, I thought that tree was going to be lit. And then you have to be able to react to that. How do you plan for that? Like what do you do? Or how much stuff do you hide from us that helps you to manage that?
It's leaving headroom on distros, making sure you don't, you know, when we first get the plans, we look at the plans and go, okay, what do we need here in terms of distro? We make sure we don't just go, oh, you've got 3 lights there, we'll put a distro with 3 sockets on. You know, making sure you've got enough headroom there, especially, it's not just our lights as well, it's the amount of, you know, like the cluster light and all the sort of little Christmassy bits that also need plugging in. So just planning to have spares from the off, but also planning to have extra power locally as well, like being able to run out a little K9 on a bit of 32 single, because we especially after having done the same trail for a couple of years, you get familiar, and you know how I was at the beginning of this saying that I'm worried about all the dark spots. It's just like making sure you know that you've got that extra headroom, like leaving in a spare 32 single where you can have that spare little bit of distro come off of that and add that in. But you, again, like you say, we hold those back from you so we don't just go, I've got this many spares of this, because again, there are also other things that come up that we're not aware of.
Yeah, percentages is a big thing. So Teddy talks about how he doesn't actually use all of his lights on his plans. And that was a thing this year that we're up against this year in terms of just late suppliers coming in, and actually they were drawing power plans to just our completed document. And I'm going, guys, we've still got at least 28% of lights still sat here, which will go out. And I think the end total, actually, we ended up using about 95% of all kit. So it's percentages of what we've got to play with. So we always have double the amount of scaff, double the amount of cable we actually need. By the end of it, you go, it's all gone, because you're in a big forest, you're in a big open space, you're in a big field. It just gets absorbed. That 5 meters is actually probably 30 meters, Well, that 5 meter bit of pipe could probably be a 2 meter bit of pipe, but then that 2 meter pipe goes somewhere else. So like everything gets used. We unloaded the truck this year, and I think every member of our crew went, "Bloody hell, Dom, it's a lot of stuff. Why have you got so much stuff this year?" And by the end of it, went, where's it all gone? Because it just got used. Yeah, there's always spots which are a bit dark that you know that are going to come up. We just put lights there. They're not necessarily on a lighting plan, but we know they're going to happen, and we fill them in. Yeah, it's just about having spares and actually having those chats beforehand and going to everyone, guys, it's going to get busy. What you see on the plan is great, but this is on-site version 1. I think we get to about on-site version 6 by the end of it, because things do change. We react to the landscape as well, and we find the best ways of working, I think.
And I would say that you need, or it says a different skill set, but an additional skill set that as production electricians and head of lighting and things like that you need to bring to the table, right? Because it's not, you know, if we decide that, we actually just want a profile here to do a gobo, it's not actually that easy, right? It might be putlogging something in, so there's, how was that sort of learning curve for you? Because at some point it would have been your first time too,
yeah.
Right? So where is that information stored? Like, are there resources where you can go, right, I'm going to go into the woods and, you know, do something?
Yeah, no.
So how do you plan for that? Like, how? I mean, I still can't wrap my head around what you guys are able to pull off.
I think learning all of that kind of things, especially from the beginning, you learn a lot from the people around you. Having a good team, a good crew around you, you know, especially, you know, you don't realize how much you rely on the guys who are just there to, you know, do the rest of the crew stuff and they're such a valuable asset to us, because they give little suggestions as well. They, you know, they do lots of works on festival sites, and so they're used to working outdoors all the time, and they're always full of good little ideas for when you do get stuck. So you turn to your team, and, you know, you're never in anything on your own.
Yeah, it's very true. I think the site team that we had in our first year, the production manager and the 2 site team and me, in my very first year of doing Christmas at Stourhead, was a massive learning curve. I had about 2 additional deliveries of cable and rigging and everything, because you suddenly go, oh, this isn't a theatre. There's no walls. This could literally go on forever, and it did. So I think we made a lot of mistakes as a team in our first year, but then you learn from that, and then your second and third year you come back stronger and stronger, and it gets bigger and better, and your teams are more developed, and everyone knows what they're doing a little bit better. So I think everyone's first time is a bit rocky. I think you're a bit of a liar if you say it was easy, because it's still not easy now.
Yes.
I think finding people who have already done these kind of outdoor trails or festivals, because a lot of it comes from the festival outdoor work, the lighting trails, like putlogs on 6 meter bits of scaff to do Festoon at Glastonbury. That's not a new thing, but we kind of do that, but put a source 4 at the top of it these days. So it's finding the people that have done it before and just extracting that very useful information from them.
I mean, the one thing that impressed me on my first day on site, when I was sort of meeting the team and seeing how it all sort of happens, is it just feels like, and being the sort of first timer, maybe that was why it felt weird, but it just felt like everyone else knew what was going on, right? And like all of a sudden there were guys, so we have a little brief meeting and go, say we're going to do this, and this, and the next thing, people just like scatter and disappear, and forklifts are going, and telehandlers are picking stuff. We're like the most extraordinary telehanded drivers. And his name has just gone. Kieran, thank you. Just like, I mean, I've never seen anybody be able to position anything with almost like millimeter accuracy on the back of trailers. And it's like, it's just not what I would expect skills to go, hey, I'm on the lighting crew. You know, from my theatre background, I don't expect the lighting crew to also just, you know, jump and telehandler and forklift something onto the back of a trailer and off you go. But those are the skill sets that exist. And it's awesome to observe and be a part of. It really is. It's just big respect to the team who puts that stuff together. Tony, you touched on being sympathetic to the landscape and responding to the landscape. When you're planning stuff, how much do you factor in visibility of fixtures, where they are, what they're going to look like in the landscape, or is the approach, it's a Christmas light, it's going to be dark, people are only going to be seeing the thing I'm lighting? So it's, I don't know if I'm asking this correctly, but I mean, how sensitive are you about where things are placed in the landscape versus what your end goal is, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's a bit 50-50, and I think this is where I don't know if Tom and Dom agree, but I mean, I think it's where a theatrical background also is an advantage to doing this type of work, because you want to also think about the presentation of it in terms of the actual fixture itself. It's sort of, in a sense, a bit like what you end up doing in fashion, in that, in actual fact, the rigging and the style and the way that you present the light that's then going to emanate the light and emit the light. You also care about what it looks like. You know, and this can be things even like parkans, you know, black wrapping or black tack wrapping the leaks, the edges around the top of the, you know, the color frame to the body of the parkan. That sort of detailing, which is very, in my opinion, you know, I learned from Hugh Van Steenwyk Fisher, you know, people who wanted the look of their fixtures. Paul Pyatt, you know, the look of the fixtures, especially if you were in a theatre and you had lots of fixtures on a frost boom, that, you know, Hugh Van Steenwyk would want every single light leak plugged once you'd focused. So the source 4s were just black objects. And I am like that to a point. Obviously, you've also got to understand the weather and ventilation and everything else. But I think it's important that, you know, quite a lot of the trails that I work on in the National Trust. Now, the National Trust have a very, even though these are commercially a very successful enterprise for the National Trust, generate a lot of money for them. National Trust still have a responsibility and, dare I use the expression, of bee in their bonnet about what things look like in the daylight. And so you have to also be mindful of everything that you're doing and building and putting in, whether it be cable distribution, metalwork, rigging, the kit, the lights themselves. But there has to be some level of sensitivity to the fact that these are still not national monuments, but they are, you know, they're still visitor attractions on the national scale that are still open to the public in the daytime. And that these sites, these host sites, are very conscious of that fact and therefore press upon you on a daily basis, in some places, the need for neatness and the need for sympathy to the environment, to the landscape. And that is quite a challenge, because ultimately you end up turning around saying, yeah, but to achieve X, I need to put Y. So you need X and Y to give you the end result. No, we don't know. Or words to that effect. So that in itself is a challenge, because if we're doing this in a theatre environment or a concert stage, or we're doing it in Excel and we're putting on a thing, it's expected that we're going to hang lights up. It's expected that we're going to put truss up and we're going to make lighting positions to create the light to tell our story about whatever event it is we're doing, whether it's fashion or corporate or a theatre show, a musical or a comedy club. In these environments, we're there to create the lighting, create the mood, help tell the story, make pretty pictures. But we have to do it in a way that's almost not invisible, but that is very, very sensitive to the environment that we're in, which is historical landscapes. Again, it's not just lights and trees. It's actually quite a challenge.
Well, I think one of the other challenges is about it being lights and trees and about it being a walk-through experience is, while for the most part, the trail goes in one direction, and it's a bit like theme parks, right? You should never look behind you when you're at a theme park, because you just see stuff that just breaks all the illusion and gives all the magic away. And to a certain extent, that's kind of what we're doing as well, as we're sort of forcing, you know, people through the thing. But you have to remember that at any point, someone's going to stop and take a picture. So and that was what surprised me, is how much light a tree needs. Because, you know, you can walk around in the dark and light it up with your phone torch, and that's fine. But if you think that the goal for the producers and for the people who are going there, or for those selfie moments or Instagrammable moments or whatever they call them, that's a lot of light you need to pump into that otherwise dark vista to get that going, and you need to be hitting it from all directions. And that for me is, I found where the lighting plan different from what we installed, is the lighting plan starts very much when you walk in this direction. And then the first time you've walked in that direction, you turn to give someone a note and you look back into just black gloom. You go, oh, actually, hang on a minute. this needs to change?
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking about that in terms of numbers now. I've been responsible for 6 Christmas trails, one of which is a complete new site in a forest. And I think across the sites that I've been directly responsible as lighting designer, that's about 2,600 fixtures.
Which then I'm going to throw the question back: how many kilometers of cable is that? I mean, we had at Bedgebury. I mean, we were in the hundreds of kilometers of cable at least. I would have thought.
I remember I ordered 335 meters.
335, right? Okay.
And we ran out.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I had about 1,200 bits of 16 amp, I think, and about 6 stillages just for 16 amp. We had a bit left, but not a lot.
Not a lot. So fixture types. We're outdoors. We're in the rain. We're in the cold. We're in the frost. We're in the snow. There aren't that many fixtures out there that can survive those extreme climates. Tony, if you look back at your history of trails, how has your equipment list shifted over the years?
Yeah, it has, and grown and developed. That's 2 reasons. Obviously, the technology is, the technology that we're seeing expand and change and develop weekly, daily, monthly. Firstly, LED, and something that I think when I was probably 10 years into being out of college, if someone had said IP to me, I would not have known what they meant. We are now in a world where fixtures have an IP rating, and the development of the LED part, the development of the LED panel, like the SGM-P5 or the Chevy Q40. One, and secondly, I think also that was driven certainly years ago. This company that started the very big trail at Kew, is that back in the day there were very few companies, there were very few hire companies then that would want you to take essentially an indoor fixture, convert it to as best as you can to have an IP rating of sorts, 16 amp plug, rubber buttons here and there, and then stick them outside. And White Light were one of the only companies that provided Culture Creative and said, look, here's 500 source 4s and 500 par cans, stick them outside, it's fine. And essentially the sort of genesis of how they then started to allow you to work with the kit of parts when I started was based around using the full fat par can and the source 4 and some MBIs, some early LED floods. That's not even 5 years ago. And then there were these things that came along, the Elation, the 6 par, and others obviously, that suddenly changed your ability, and then the P5 changed your ability to be able to scale up what you could do in terms of color, in terms of lower consumption, in terms of daisy chaining, and so on and so forth. But of course, those units carried a higher premium, so you found yourself in a bit of a quandary between essentially cheap cannon fodder fixtures like a standard par can, which are a few pounds, and something that was then quite expensive like an LED par, which had an IP65 rating. I mean, that has obviously changed massively in the last 4 years. That has changed exponentially in terms of now what is available to us on the market, and to anyone who wants to put one of these outdoor events on, what's now available and what all the hire companies will provide. There's a lot to choose from. White Light have gone through a big process of buying a load more. They have a big arsenal now of IP pars and IP panels. So essentially, the smaller sites, the newer sites that I've done this year have been based essentially largely around the LED rig and supplemented with things like pars here and there, MBIs, and obviously source 4s, but they're all source 4s primarily to do gobo work.
And for you guys dealing with the sort of spectrum of stuff that you get, what problems does that introduce? Obviously some stuff is IP rated, and that's kind of plug it in and hopefully it does its thing. But the stuff that isn't, what do you do to try and make it last as long as it possibly will?
it's a challenge, especially because in
dramatic.
yeah, in terms of where it's there for a few weeks, we put it in early from the beginning of November, where the weather's not quite turned yet, so we're not quite experiencing like the full wrath of what these lights are going to go through, and whether that be rain or just cold. So we do what we can, like we put black tack over the ends of source fours to try and stop water getting into the burner. Just trying to direct you lighting designers to kind of put them at the right angles. If you've got a source four that's pointing straight up, it's water that goes into it is going to collect straight into the burner. Parkans are, it's not much you can do for a parkan, but on the same having some gel over the front of it, to stop like leaves getting in and burning up, and then just bouncing some rain off. But just because they're a empty can, the water short will just run straight through, so they're less of a problem. But they really get affected by the cold. And in an ideal world, what we'd have is having dimmers to warm them all up nice and gradually, so they get to their temperature over some time. Going from frozen to being on at 1,000 watts is quite a big jump, and a lot of the time the lamps will literally crack in half. The lens comes away from the back of the lamp, just because of the quick change.
Because it's twofold, right? Because at the end of the night, they've gone from being full on to full off in a really cold environment, so they're being forced to cool down a lot quicker than they were ever designed to be. And then the flip side is, during the day, they never really heat up enough because there's not much warmth left in the sun now, and they're under trees and under canopies and all that sort of thing. And then they go from cold off to instant on.
Yeah, they freeze. It's quite strange watching a Source 4 defrost. 36s is the worst with their two lenses, but they basically basically freeze up. So we've got quite a lot of column work we do. And I'll have to go to Tony, don't look at the columns yet, they've not defrosted, because actually you're watching them over about half an hour clear up and get their proper output back. And why they so dim, because it's just so frosty inside. Luckily now, White Light have come up with this quite interesting invention. I call it the takeaway. I don't know. It's basically a silver plate which sits on the back of a burner, which tries to deflect water, which comes down straight. As we know, rain kind of comes from all directions. It works fairly well from the feedback I've heard so far. So there's quite a lot of photos actually circulating of them online, going, what are these things on the back of these Source 4s that have been retrofitted? It's just quite a good little rainfall device. Parkans, again, we don't really have a problem apart from lamps cracking in half. IP fixtures, as long as they are maintained properly, are also mostly fine. Their screens often play up because they get too cold. And yeah, defrosting Source 4s. But other than that, actually, the lights survive all right. And there's a good team behind it to make sure they daily lamp rounds and actually making sure the connectors are the right way and getting the flies out of them. That was a fly. I had a photo for yesterday with a fly in the gobo. So that's a new one from someone else. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we get off all right. A lot of it is under trees, some under cover, and if it is pointing straight down or straight up, a bit of clear gel or the new takeaway deflector, it really helps. So I think this year they've got it about 87% there.
That's a fairly accurate percentage. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
nicely
I thought about that earlier.
So let's talk about the crew that stays behind. What's their sort of average working day? I mean, talk us through their pain.
Well, they get to site. Spedgebury opens at about 4:30. They get to site at least midday, and they have to go around, turn all the generators on first, and then they go out to each individual distro and turn each strip on one at a time, so we don't cause a big overflowing current to make the generators cry. And then they have to go around and make sure all the lights are still doing what they were doing when you left them. So again, going around, changing all the lamps that have cracked. Accessing some lights is a challenge, where there's a nice pretty gobo walk that's putlogged into the ground, but it's on a slope.
Don't know what you mean.
Who would put so many in? But yeah, accessing them can be a challenge because, as you saw, three of us footing a ladder to get a Source 4, and there's only a handful of them on site, and they're all split up, so they don't quite have that that amount of crew there to deal with those changes. And then they're looking at color as well. So as the color's burning out, the more the gel's wet, and then it gets turned on from being cold and wet to hot straight away. They burn out quite quickly, especially the darker end of the spectrum, so all the blues that are blocking more light than like reds and oranges. They've got a small number of spare burners that will go around and change on source floors that are too wet. And again, it cannot just be from rain. Like you say, with them freezing up, once they defrost, just that frost then becomes water. So even when it's not raining, lamps being wet is still an issue.
It's the lamp as well, actually. We found this year with quite a lot of testing, we've got about 20 spare burners as well. We swap the lamp and the burner, because even if you swap a burner, it will usually still trip because the lamp has actually got moisture inside of it as long as it's worked its way up inside the lamp. There's quite a lot of chasing your tail, I think, especially, as you said, the teams are a lot smaller. Paul Milford, who is our Charlie #1, who runs Stourhead, gets there about midday again, starts turning on with the power team, one of those, and then you've got the kind of site manager and then a fire one, basically. He does all the fire garden stuff. So there's actually only 4 of them that stay throughout the whole team for the whole run. And they turn it all on, go around, turn all the installations on, check color, check focus as it gets darker, start doing walkarounds. Heat shield, I put heat shield in every single light, even if it's got a bit of 202 in there, because it just still helps when it's on for 8 hours a night every single day for a month. And if it just saves you having to change one more bit of gel every time. They've got a tough job, the guys that look after it.
And I think you were telling me that you've had situations, or someone was telling me, Tony, it might have been you when we were chatting earlier, that you get animals who'll sort of nest in warm places, like you sort of have dimmer boxes and things like that, and they'll chew through DMX cables, or there's all of that kind of stuff. And as hungry as most of us theatre technicians are, we don't generally eat through DMX cables when we need a snack. So there's that as well that sort of gets factored into things.
Especially when you've got a light that, is it wet? Has the lamp just died? And then you could actually, that's on 30 meters of cable in wet, muddy grass. That, there could be a fault anywhere along that as well.
Yeah. They have a handful of spares, let's put it that way. They've got a lot of spares of everything because it's a tough run. It's going well so far, I hear. They're not having to swap too much out, but I mean, things do go wrong.
And this is my bigger picture point, Declan, about one could see this as being quite straightforward. That's quite easy, this type of stuff. Actually, when you start to drill down into actually what it takes, to put them together, the restrictions, as we all have at any place and any time, anywhere, about budget, because everything ultimately will come down to what we can and can't afford. You and I know if we had another 50,000 quid in our budget, what we'd end up doing. But we don't. We have to have a particular amount of stuff that there comes a point when we say we can't afford any more. But actually, the challenges that these take to A, put on, B, mount them, and then actually run them for a month this time of the year, and then take them away, and hopefully by the end of January, beginning of February, that those each individual site wouldn't even know that we've been there. They're actually quite a logistical, planning, technical challenge. Just because I'm at Kingston Lacey, I got to the other day. Oh, why do those 3 things not work? Oh, literally, I kid you not, you could see it. A squirrel had eaten through this cable. And so 3 things didn't work. And you could see the teeth marks where this bit of TRS just was in bits because he just thought, delicious. And it's like, what? I can't believe it. This doesn't work because of a squirrel. But it's a fact. And then suddenly you're down to nearly the end of your cable because you've done the build, and so on and so on. The fact we don't have the ceilings and walls and necessarily get warm regularly, and so on and so forth. And then you factor in all of the little challenges that it takes to actually keep everything working against the elements. And then we, like all of us, we have people to answer to. We have people up the food chain from us who've asked us to be there and deliver this job. When we have to present this to, we're not just running around in the woods going, hey, let's turn some lights on. we are doing this with a purpose in mind, that somebody wants a particular finished article, a finished product, and we have to show it to them like we would any production.
Touch on squirrels, and that is kind of a nice segue into the ecology side of putting this together. And I know each site is different and each site has its different rules, but over the years, what are some of the things that you've had to do to deal with the environment and protect the animals and the wildlife that live there for the rest of the year?
Yeah, well, this is a good question, and this year specifically is the first time, I kid you not, the first time since I've been involved in designing lighting for these festive trails. Let's just keep that there. You know, these are a Christmas trail theme. This is the first time the site I've done at Killerton near Exeter, where the ecology specialist who surveyed the site and surveyed our actual trail, basically there were 3 areas on the trail from start to finish, 3 clear delineated areas, and they are marked on the lighting plan, I kid you not, wait for it, as bat highways. And all that was allowed to happen in these particular areas of the path were just low level across the path, diagonal LED par, so just the red chip at 50% output, making a small zigzag of light across the path for about 25 meters. And they were drawn on the lighting plan as bat highways, because he felt that these particular areas, the red is the most sympathetic light on the spectrum that will not hinder a bat and a bat in its travel. And these 3 areas had to be, so you suddenly were walking, you'd seen all this lovely Christmas, and then 25 meters of just red dim path. And they were actually marked as, I don't know if any signage went out to say these are bat highways. It was certainly drawn on the lighting plan, they were bat highways. And even the man who came round to tell me about the bat highways wore Batman socks.
Fair enough. We had some bat zones on our site as well.
Yeah.
There's only one area that was really a highway, but there were a couple of trees that we were told we had to avoid, and you were just not allowed to get any lights anywhere near.
It's interesting to see those trees change over the years as well, because I'd walked in and expecting certain trees to be like, don't like these ones, and actually it's this year they've changed. And of course,
right, because the animals move around. Yeah,
we're quite lucky, I think. Actually,
I think it does. The importance of this, obviously, it's terribly important because we're going into these natural landscapes and habitats. But it is interesting how the different sites, how seriously they take it, because it is definitely, in some places, certainly that I've worked this year, it's quite dialed back, the ecology, in terms of the rabbits or the squirrels or certainly the bats. Whereas somewhere like Killerton, I think they have quite a big local community conservation effort and push about the landscape at Killerton and the habitat there, and therefore they were very, very mindful of it. And yes, there was a raft of trees at Killerton that you just couldn't even go near. Whereas Delamere Forest, which, like you doing Bedgebury, there's a great big forest near Chester. I think we had a quick ecology report, and there were no trees pretty much where we were doing the trail that were affected at all, and therefore we could basically, just get on and do what we were doing.
I found it interesting this year when one of the residents called us up and was like, "You pointed a light at my house," and then went on to say about how the wildlife move over to his farm for this period of the year when we're doing the trail. And it's sort of the first year that I've heard of it doing that, because you see the odd rabbit, if you're very lucky, a deer on your way home, but because you haven't seen them in the forest, you just don't think they're there. And from our sort of point of view, we're there to do the trail. Someone, from the forestry has signed off that we can do this. It's like we're not sure how we can, help disturb things like that, because like the squirrels stay, but the rabbits and the deer that go off to his farm got to move their homes for the winter.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. There's not much you can do to mitigate that, really. I mean, the animals are going to go where it's quiet or where it's dark, or And some will hang out where it's warm, in which case, those cozy little park hen cages that we've put everywhere are a benefit. So health and safety is obviously a big thing, right, on sites. I mean, we're putting it all in. We're working on uneven ground, and all those sorts of things. What's your sort of? I mean, I know that's a largely production management side of things, but there's obviously a degree of health and safety. Less so about our working practices, because obviously we're all inducted on the sites. But what do we do to protect the audience? So once we're finished, because things get hot, things are dangerous. It's electricity, is water.
Yeah. Everything's actually quite far away from reach in terms of the path you're walking down anyway. And if it's a putlog with a bit of scaff, all the nuts and bolts are kind of foamed over, so you can't physically hurt yourself on those. And anything that is hot and reachable, you'll put a protective cage over it. It's not the prettiest things. Luckily, we didn't have any this year, but it's just, to state, do not touch this. This is hot. Kind of cables are all out the way and everything. And we don't have any cable ramp on site at all. Everything will get flown up and over. And we're also quite lucky at Stourhead. We've got lots of drains in the paths, which you can run cables through and in out of the way of people. So I think that's the main annoyance, because there's so many paths and windy ways. You've got to get our power, the logistics of getting that. We've just got to go up and over. But yeah, I think we're quite lucky. Everything is quite out of reach.
Slightly different at Bedgebury.
Yeah, similar again. We've got the cages over lights that are anywhere near a path where a child could just wander over to and touch. But the forestry are good to us at Bedgebury, and they rope and pin almost the entire trail. Still slightly above some kids' heights, which is why we've got the cages.
For the kids, or?
But yeah, mostly everything's kept away from them. Again, we don't have any cables running. We were not as lucky to have drains to run cables through, but the amount of up and overs that we can then utilise to put lights on as well, just to keep cables out of reach.
And so, Tony, you've done a couple of sites, and you've done a couple of them more than once. How hard is it to come up with a different idea each year? Because you don't just want to rinse and repeat as much as possible. I mean, if there's something you're particularly happy with, or somebody specifically asks you for, fair enough. But I think we all tend to want to do something differently. How many ways are there to light a tree? How do you sort of deal with that?
Well, I think this year, certainly with Stourhead this year, we were able to, yes, how many different ways are there? How many different ways are there to light a tree? And the simple answer is this: the more inventive that you need to be, and the more differently you need to then start thinking about approaching it, is you have to go back to the powers that be and say, well, I really need to spend a bit more money. Now, what we're able to do with these projects, which makes us in a very enviable position and a very lucky position, is the fact that the Christmas art trails do well. Commercially, they do well. They sell the tickets. They are profitable. Unfortunately, therefore, what that means is the fact that then to help you take it up a level and say, right, what was last year here? How is this year now going to be here? Is that they listen to you and say, okay, well, what would you do? What can you do? So one of the briefs I had for Stourhead this year was they turned around to me and said, can you make a stand and stare moment? Design something, design a thing. And so I went off and designed a thing. I designed a piece, a pixel button show, basically. And I did some R&D and found a company to build it and showed them the sort of tests. It's very simple tests on a bench, and they were like, yeah, okay, let's make this. Go and make it. So one of the elements, one of the sort of, if you like, artist elements this year at Stourhead, is an element, a show element that I designed based on the fact that the desire, the need from the end result was, how do we now take this up a level? So we have a lighting element, for example, that's part of the trail that's been designed by somebody who's a lighting designer. as opposed to just going to another artist and saying, give us something that's beautiful and artistic or seasonal, but designed with an artist's eye. And so it meant, because I've designed this particular element with lighting in mind, and also knowing that it needs to be something that you could kind of just breeze past if you wanted to, or stand there for a couple of minutes and watch, it had to deliver in sort of two ways. But I think the rest of our trail, that aside, I think the rest of our trail at Stourhead, yeah, we had a little bit more money this year, which meant we were able to phase out what I call the full fat parkan. We were able to phase out more PARs and up our LED inventory, which gives us suddenly, you were saying, it goes back to your point, Declan, about the color. And suddenly, actually, although obviously there's a different frequency to the light, etc., the flexibility that suddenly having an RGBA PAR gives us suddenly, and being able to daisy chain and very easily add 3 if we've got them to add, suddenly your picture can become a completely different thing, as opposed to something you've had to carefully consider on your drawing board or on your drawing when you're drawing your plan with a parkan that you're specifying a filter in. And therefore, I think by being able to progress your design influences down a route that gives you more flexibility by using more LED fixtures outside, that then gives you the tools further down the line to be able to say, well, actually, because the trail is the same this year, we can really emphasize this in a different way or that in a different way. And there are 3 things that we did this year at Stourhead that were not a complete copy, but based on the success that we had with it last year, we did a sort of copy and paste with a little bit of the ante being up, to put a streamer in example instead of just static picture, to be able to just make color movement happen through the evening. But there were 3 elements really this year of what we'd like, with the way we lit Stourhead, that worked really well this year. And one of the first things I said to Dom was, well, these 3 things I'm going to incorporate again. We'll work the color differently, but we'll approach those 3 areas in exactly the same way. So I think if you find there is that element of, if something's not broken, why fix it? At the same time, what you don't want is your audience saying, oh, well, I did that last year. So I think we probably got to the end of those those particular areas this year in the way that we've done them. And for year 4 next year, we'll have to slightly think outside of the box. But it'll come down to budget.
Fair enough, as it always does. You chat about color, and I think that was the one thing that I learned is, my instinct, because of my theatre background, is, I'm going to have a subtle shade of this and a subtle shade of this and 3 different shades of blue. Yeah, it's blue, it's red, it's green, it's cyan, it's magenta, it's yellow, and crack on, right? So, and that is one area where having LEDs is great, because you pull LEDs onto your theatre show, and color is still important to you. You want to know what the metama is and how that color is put together, and is it rendering correctly. And it was actually really liberating to go, make it blue.
Yeah.
What blue? I don't know. Yeah, that blue's nice. Do that. Oh, okay. You got it? No, that's fine. And then make it green. What green? Any green. Yeah, that green's lovely. It's like, it was actually quite nice.
That was like lighting with me. So
yeah.
exactly the same. Dom's like, what green? I thought, I don't know that one.
Well, that one.
So I'll tell you when to stop, right? Just turn it on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Add a bit more red. Oh no, too much red. Okay, that's gone a bit too yellow. No, there we go. Yeah, that'll do. It's great. Yeah.
But I think, but what this does, Declan, what this does is underline the point. There can be a danger of theorizing sometimes. There can be we might need to do that if we're doing Chekhov and we're doing this in Hampstead Theatre, and we have to think about the pastels. We have to think, is it 202 or 203 in that line? And that there is going to be a difference, and it's really important, that shaft of light through the window in that moment and the big pause. Fine, and actually there's a time and a place as practitioners where we need that level of our dramaturgy in the light has to really be there. But our dramaturgy of light in this application is that we can just do that. It is, I say to Dom all the time, especially how we've worked this year with me being in other places, there is no I in team, and it's not as cliche, it's true. There has to be an element of, Dom says, well, what colour should these be? And I go, well, why don't you have a look? And what do you think? You're the one that's put them there. You've been standing up this tree and you've been knee deep in laurel, ratchet strapping these lights to a blinking tree. You go to the nearest blue, tell me what you think, and I'll have a look. And I go, that looks really nice. Thank you very much. And I kind of think, well, doesn't that work? Because actually we've got a lovely result. We've done it together. It's not about, well, it has to be here because it's on the plan. No. If you think it's that type of work, then this type of work probably isn't for you. If you think that it's just about the design and the designer's autonomy and nothing else, then I think you'll probably find yourself finding it very frustrating. I think you have to use your expertise around you and sponge off each other in terms of saying, actually, that pink looks fantastic. I wouldn't use that pink anywhere else anytime I use a light. But here, up there on that canopy of trees, that pink looks fantastic. Done. And what's wrong with that?
Absolutely. We've had a question come in from someone in the chat, and I'm going to expand on it a little bit. It's what is your favorite light trail that you've each done and sort of worked on? And then I'm gonna add a bolt on to that being what's your favorite effect been that you've ever sort of achieved or created? And I'll just come around this way. Tom, I'll start with you. Unless anyone else has got an instant answer, but not to put you on the spot.
But having only done sort of two different ones, obviously I started at Bewley, which was quite a small site, and then moved to Bedgebury. I think I'm fonder of Bedgebury, but if you asked me that picking a year would be, I couldn't pick.
Well, it would have to be this one, wouldn't it?
That's what I have to say here.
Yeah, you do, absolutely.
Tom, it's this year. This year's the best one, yes.
There we go. Tony gets it.
Yeah. It is. This year is the
Your
best
check's
year.
in the post, Tony. Thanks.
But as a whole, seeing it develop over the time as well is with it changing each year, and actually having you. So the past 2 years I've done it. It's been the same designer, and they've come in. They learned from what they did the first year, changed it up, made it easier the next year, and then to have you come in this year and to totally change it, and not only to have it from your design and have that completely different, but also your brief was very different as well. So I think this year has been a fun year, and not on top of it going smoothly as well, but seeing all the different changes in how the forest is looking, especially somewhere that you know so well, and you every part I'd expecting something from here, and you'd actually turn around and be like, oh no, I've not lit this, but I've lit this, and I'm like, oh wow, that's nice.
Your check's in the post too. Excellent. Tom, how about you?
So, having done Stourhead for 3 years, I think Stourhead is the favourite trail, but the favourite year has to be this one. I think we've had more money to play with the site. It's been bigger, it's been better. The whole thing has just been an amazing experience. It's really hard to say what a favourite moment is, but along the trail, we've kind of given little moments names of who's done it. So Dom's moment is down quite near the end of the trail with 4 blue MBIs and 4 blue 6-bars just in this massive tree. And that's my favourite moment, just simplest 8 lights. But the light that the MBIs are giving off compared to with the LED is really offsetting it, just with like the lake in the background and the trail continuing. It's just so simple, but just so beautiful. You don't need 100 lights to light something. 8 lights have done it. So I think that's my favourite little moment.
So just picking up on MBIs for anyone who doesn't know what that is. So MBIs, it's a metal halide lamp. It's a fairly old technology now. They come in 150 watt, 250 watt, and 400 watt flavors, and you get them in a range of actual colors. So the actual metal halide gives off a color. So there's obviously the whites, and you get a warm white and a cool white, but you also get a blue, a green, a pink, which is a bit Barbie. But I will put my hand up and say I did use a couple of those. And they are, I mean, it's how buildings used to be floodlit, right? Before LEDs, it was used to put up these big floodlights uplighting buildings, and that was how you would get color in. If you couldn't afford big fancy glass dichroic filters, is you would spec a discharge lamp that kicks off color. So for anyone who wasn't sure what the MBIs are, that's what those are. Tony, how about you?
Sorry, let me mute. Yeah, I think the first year that I did for them, which Bewley will always be something where I feel like I sort of cut my teeth a bit. I had to PM it that year because there was no production manager, so I did a bit of a twofold job. But I also came in it very late. It was a very busy year for other things, and so it was brilliant in lots of ways, but also a bit of a baptism of fire. It was a bit of seat of our pants stuff, which is a side of me that I really kind of like that element of it. But I think I have to agree with Dom that actually this year at Stourhead, apart from the fact it's one of the most beautiful of the National Trust portfolio properties in the United Kingdom. You know, people travel from all over the world to photograph the bridge across the lake to the Pantheon in the distance. It's the most photographed vista in the National Trust portfolio. So it's a real honour and a privilege, really, to be able to go and work in a site like that for nearly a month every year. And well, I wasn't there this year, but obviously Dom's there for you know, a big chunk of time. It's a really, really beautiful place. So if you're starting with, excuse me, if you're starting with a landscape that is already stunning, it is already a beautiful place to just go and visit and walk and just take in the scenery and the Capability Brown landscape again, and so on and so forth. Actually, if you just take a little bit of thought and the right kind of kit, start applying it in the right way, you're kind of there. So the landscape and the place is doing so much work for you. And yeah, I mean, I think it was a favourite kind of moment, really. I'm a bit stuck up for that because I mean, I'm a big believer in the blue MBI because of the frequency of the halide and what it does flat on its back, what it does to the top of, you know, very, very bare branches, especially birches and the sort of the lighter colour bark trees. You suddenly, you know, 3 MBIs on their back, just 400 watt MBIs on their back straight up. And suddenly you look up and you've got what looks like something out of a set of Frozen. Actually, all we've done is put 3 lights flat on their back, pointing straight up. And
Color-wise, the blue metal halide is kind of like a Lee 197 for anyone who wants a sort of a reference point, right?
Yes, absolutely. But again, to that kind of bark, to especially birches and silver birches, you just suddenly get this world that looks like you know, we're in the set of Frozen. And I'm a massive, as Tom knows, a massive user of the blue MBI as a back palette, and then be able to use a PAR or LED PAR to accent and highlight up the centre of a tree. So I think it's one of my favourite motifs to continually use, which I think we will probably always find ourselves using on the Stourhead Trail, even though, as I say, we've probably definitely now thrown a gauntlet to ourselves this year in terms of how we now take it into year 4, which, again, it's going to be about our big old friend money.
I mean, I think the exciting thing is it's an experience for people to see a familiar landscape in a whole new light, if you will. There's no other way to say it without, you know, without being cheesy on it. And it is fun because you discover things. You know, you walk around the site during the day, and your perception of it in the dark when it's lit is completely different.
Yeah.
And I think that's, as an audience member walking through, the thing that's most fun is everybody knows the trail. They've walked their kids and their dogs and their everything, you know, every weekend for the past 52 weeks.
Exactly. It's one thing I've said to all of the trails I've worked on this year, so 6 Christmas trails that I've been involved with this year. I've said time and time again on all of the walkarounds, on all of the site visits, to everybody that we're working with all the time, it's all very well us being here on a beautiful 26-degree sunny July afternoon. Think cold, think blackout. You have to ignore what you're looking at now. Think that actually the leaf drop that will be around you, these trees will have a very, very different attitude to them once the leaf drops happened of autumn, even though that took a lot longer this year because we had such a mild November. And that Stourhead, when I first got there, looked very, very different to how it looked at Stourhead last year because we had a much, much warmer October and November. And therefore the leaf drop came at a different time. Therefore the landscape was very different when we started. It had hit pretty much by the time we opened. But boy, it was very, very different.
Yeah.
But you've got to walk around those trails when you know where the location is in the map and think of this in the dark, think of this in the dark. And that's quite a challenge because actually it's a beautiful July afternoon and it's 26 degrees and you've got an iced tea in your hand and you're going, oh, we're going to put some lights over here. And it's oh, it's very warm in a t-shirt. And actually when we're going to be doing this in real and these families are going to be coming around, they're going to be in woolly jumpers and scarves and woolly hats. Carrying a very expensive glass of something hot because it's going to be freezing cold and dark. So yeah, there's many challenges to it.
You used the word dark a couple of times, and it's a darkness that you do not experience anywhere else. No matter, you know, your best blackout on stage is bright compared to compared to that trail when it's overcast or when there's no moon. But then the flip side is, we did our walk around for clients this year in full moon, and actually the difference that made on site was huge. And you kind of walk around going, all right, don't look there. I haven't lit that. But actually 3 nights later, you walk the trail and you don't see that because it's just dark. And I found it a really nice, they always say we start from a blank canvas and you work from there. It's the aside from the landscape, but as from a light canvas point of view, it's the blackest black you're ever going to be able to start from. And it's great because actually that 50-watt spike light is really bright in that dark environment. And some fairy lights are really bright against a path in a really dark environment. And it's fun. It's a learning curve. So yeah. Circling back to power. You've obviously got generators dotted around the site. How do you go about calculating? Because obviously you get a plan and you're a rough calc on that, but you have to factor in the catering trucks and the all the extra bain-maries that are suddenly going to appear, and the kettles and the festoon and the everything like that. So what's your process to sort of calculating that? Do you just go, well, this is the lighting plus a percentage, or do you actually sit and do more? Not that I'm don't want to sort of drop you in it here. If you don't do more detailed work, you can say that you do. But what's your sort of process for the power plan? Because that's obviously a whole thing in addition to the lighting.
It's a whole thing. At Stourhead, we get away really quite lightly because the power company looks after the majority of the power planning. We kind of tell them what our requirements are in terms of actual wattage and amperage in each location. We tell them where our distro needs to be and kind of how beefy that needs to be as well. Within those calculations, I'll put headroom in for additional fixtures and if things move around. The site team will then also tell us how much festoon they're putting in, what catering we're putting in, what are the requirements everywhere else. And then we don't spec generators at Stourhead. The power team comes and specs generators and their distro and heavy mains. But at Stourhead this year, I think we had 6 or 7 generator farms across the site and some hard power as well, which has been utilised from different buildings and posts. So it's quite a big spread. But yeah, we get away with lightly. I don't know how you guys do it.
So we install the heavy mains at Bedbury ourselves. But again, we're quite lucky in that there's a power company that look at the power. So they get the specs of roughly, based on the light design, roughly what's going to be there. Again, given loads of headroom for catering because we know what caterers are like. One kettle was 3.
And then there are all the space heaters in their catering vans that they forgot to tell you about that are there as well.
Oh yeah, I just brought this.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, sorry.
My catering and power plans.
Oh yeah, sorry. But then in terms of actually planning it, what I learned from doing it at the start was I went in, I sort of created a spreadsheet with how much power is on the lighting plan, and then editing it as we went around plugging things in. And over the years, I've sort of realized that that's actually a waste of time because things are so dynamic, they change so much. So what I sort of do instead of doing that, because you can't, you're going to do it too many times if you're going to plan it like that. Just kind of say to your team putting everything in, give them a sort of limit per socket or per type of light of how many they can put together. Try and get them to balance things as they're going. So rather, before this year, we had some interesting distro before where every distro, the phasing on was different. So it might be phase 111, 222. Some would be 123, 123. Others it'd be like 11, 22, 33. But luckily, this year we had the power guy that normally has looked after it for the past 2 years during the run. Now works for a power company. So the power planning for this year was a hell of a lot easier because we had someone who was on our side, then on the power side, and he just took the old plans and just knowing what we need just sort of made it that so much easier.
Yeah.
And then when we come and plug things in, again, I stopped doing that spreadsheet because it's even during the run that starts to change.
It's also a bit of an organic thing, right? Because I mean, one of the things that you have to watch when you're dealing with power is the balancing across your phases.
Yeah.
And we'll go, oh, I need 3 extra things here and 2 extra things there, and take 3 of those away from there, and let's put them in a different thing.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing, right? So how much active management is there from your side, or you just go, I think it'll be all right, and I'll come back to it later? I mean,
yes. Again, it's sort of briefing your team well enough to be like, this is how I want you to do it, and so you leave headroom, because then another team will come along and they'll go, oh, I can put a ray gun into that random socket that's near where I just put this cluster light.
A lot gets layered, a lot gets added on top of each other. You suddenly have little PA systems, cluster lights, fairy lights, Christmas trees plugged into all sorts. I mean, again, I try and separate it out, so we've got lighting circuits, sound circuits, installation circuits, so it is easier to organize. It never really happens 100% like that, because someone from the site team will just go, 16 amp socket, plug it in there. In terms of looking after like phasing and balancing, we just look at the screens on our generators and we'll go, okay, live 1, live 2, live 3, what's a bit hot? And we'll just juggle things around. And the power team are really good at kind of working with us with their, you've got 6 power cans over there, just spread them out a bit more here, and suddenly actually fix a lot of your issues.
You've also got to look at balancing, not just between your phases, just on the generator end, but just also making sure things aren't out of whack, because your phases could be perfectly balanced on your generator, but actually on that distro, 125 meters away, everything's on phase 1.
Yeah.
right.
So again, just making sure you look at your distro as you're plugging things in and try and keep it equal from the beginning, and that makes it so much easier.
So something we haven't really touched on yet, and this is a question that's come into the chat, is what about control? We haven't sort of really spoken much about that. And the question in full is, what about control? Are there any aspects of the walkthrough that require localized control system, or is there ever a need to run control over the whole sort of walkthrough as a thing? So like you would in a theme park, there's one sort of big system management.
Yeah.
Which in my mind, when we were first talking about it, I just assumed that's what it would be, and corrected me very quickly on that, going, no, we're not doing that. But so, Tony, I'll start with you. How do you decide what needs control and where, and what's your sort of process, and then what do you end up using?
I think it really comes down to 2 things, really, that especially having done a sort of multitude of sites this year in one go, is that it depends if those particular sites have ended up with the budget and or need for what I call a finale piece or a show piece. What I tend to refer to as anything that's dynamically controlled. And this also goes back to, I suppose what we're also in here is we're in an interesting cusp, Declan, we're in an interesting cusp between where we now are able to, because of the growth of using LED fixtures, we now are in this situation where actually, for the sake of having a small NTEC streamer and having a desk on site for a couple of weeks, that because we're ending up with more LED fixtures that we could potentially DMX together and therefore do something that makes the dynamic just changing color picture or whatever it might be, and then we want to just record that for 20 seconds on a streamer and play back, and that's what happens, is that may now become something we plan to do more. Of course, rewinding backwards again to how it was when even 4 or 5 years ago when I started with this, you don't have dimmers, end of, you just don't. And therefore, if you've got something plugged in, it's just plugged in and therefore it's on. And so the bigger sites, the Q and obviously Blenheim, the sort of the flagship shows obviously have different budgets, different ways of being able to afford and program and use a more, the Son Lumiere type of event, a big moving light show as a finale. And historically, those sites have done that. But those budgets will always be very separated from the lighting, the site lighting, the creative budget, because they're seen as a set piece. So they're seen as content. And that's the buzzword that we use in these particular trails for artist commission, is seen as a piece of content. So a finale lighting show is seen in that way and not part of the site, not part of the trail. And so, for example, this year, yes, we were able to extract another £20,000 to our budget to be able to afford sort of 14 moving lights and some panels and pars to make a finale show on our bridge, which is the final picture you see as you finish the trail. And so obviously that's QLab, and it's running off a puck. We programmed it on a geo, and obviously being White Light supplying most of the sites that we were doing, essentially ETC was the sort of weapons of choice, whether it was geo and at5 or ions, and then there are your pucks being linked to QLab to play back. And so we did that in a couple of we've got a couple of places of sort of dynamic control this year at Stourhead because of this installation I did, designed, and also the finale. I've got 2 other sites where we've got desks driving a finale show, but I've also got 2 sites where there's no desk, just the pictures are set and that's all they needed to be. So it's kind of really dictated to by the size and scale of the particular trail, and whether the powers that be then said, actually, no, this particular trail needs to have a bigger ending or a fancy moment at the end or not. Slightly something I could choose and determine. It's also something slightly beyond my control in a way.
Fair enough. And then for you guys, if there is an area that has control, how does that impact on where does control live? Assuming there's a console. So if it's a show that's running a console, like what happens with that?
In a bike shed, usually, an outdoor bike shed. We've got, at Stourhead this year, we had 4 dynamic locations of control. So we had 2 pucks on site and we had 2 DMX streamers. So at every control point, we had an outdoor bike shed with a UPS, a DMX splitter, and the streamer or a puck, then linked to QLab. That just gets turned on at the start of every walk around, and then the laptops get collected at the end of the night to go home into somewhere safe and dry, so they don't get stolen as well, hopefully. And they just work. They just run their shows. We don't necessarily always need a splitter, but the splitter is mostly in there. So if a squirrel goes for a bit of DMX, you only lose a few lights instead of a whole show. I suppose at Stourhead, we've also got another piece of control. So we've got wireless DMX over a lake. Over across the lake, we've got a building called the Pantheon, which has got 20 odd DMX control lights and a dimmer rack. And that actually links in from the finale. And I don't know, Tony, what the actual distance is from your control point to the Pantheon, but it's a good few hundred meters away.
It's about 600 meters.
Yeah, so where you actually watch a show to what you're seeing at a distance, and that goes through your control system, through the wireless DMX over the lake, because it's just complete clear line of sight, point-to-point link, and it's worked flawlessly now for a couple of years, which runs that other bit of show. Actually, DMX and control doesn't really go that wrong. As long as you put it all in when it's dry, you won't have any problems. You get a bit of water in some DMX, you get a few flickers and bit of issues here and there. But actually, it's just the same as anything else we put in. Like, it's actually pretty solid stuff.
Yeah, very much the same. We've got one ion on our site, and that's in a bike shed. We're lucky enough to have been given a dimmer, a 24-way dimmer, which is
helps keep things warm.
Yeah, helps to warm things up at the beginning. Then we've got 3 streamers around the rest of the site that just popped into little dry boxes. It's interesting to see like the level of control change over the years. The first year we had a show on the pond, we had the ion in a shed, and I think one other streamer somewhere else. The second year we sort of came armed with a few streamers because it was the first year. It was like, here's some more LED stuff. So it was right. We'll make some nice little moments everywhere around the trail. And it got to the night of the walk around, and we hadn't programmed yet. So the lights were there, they were on, and we sort of, as they were going around, it was like, right, this is going to be doing like a nice effect in a few areas. And they just turned around and was like, no, we like it as it is. Keep it like that. And I think 2 of the areas were open white.
Right.
And they did look good. You know, the Scotch pines being uplit in Q40s did look good. But again, it was such a shame to have that taken away when we'd, finally got something that could be controlled like that.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have some animation, particularly in Bedbury where the Electric Forest is here, to have it so deep and to sort of and you get very different perspectives as you walk along that part of the trail, and seeing the front half of the lights go out, and then you're just seeing the lights, all the trees that are lit right in the back. But yeah, the controlling.
I mean, I guess, and I suppose it's the same thing with the lighting technology, really, in that technology's moved along to the point where this is easier, right? I mean, like wireless. I mean, before, to do something whatever it was, 600 meters across a lake, it was just no, it was going to be the answer, right? And that would have been as simple as that. I mean, and the flip side, of course, is then everything else would have been as simple as that. But we do more because we can.
Yeah.
I mean, when we did our walk around, as I'm sure there is a couple of sites, there's a sort of laser show that happens over a lake at one point. And on the night of our walk around, the temperature literally dropped as management arrived on site. Take from that what you will. But it was great. And as we got to the lake, there was this mist that had just formed over the water. And the laser on that mist with the water and the reflection of the mist was extraordinary. And the management walking around were going, "This is amazing. Have you got some sort of haze machine here over the lake?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and it's really complicated. We've got fans, DMX controlled fans. We're sort of balancing the levels and we're monitoring the wind. And it got to the point where they're like, "Nah, you're having a laugh." And I'm like, "Yeah, no, absolutely. This is completely a happy accident." Yeah. And it'd be amazing. And I'm sure one day there may be a way to. I'm going to regret saying this because I know it's being recorded. And Tom, as I can see, I'm getting daggers here from the production electrician on site. But it'd be great if you do get to a point where there will be a technology where we can go, actually, I would like a little cube of smoke here, please. And we just do something in that. Not quite as literal as that, of course. But, if you could contain stuff, it would be amazing. And who knows where technology is going for any of the other manufacturers who happen to be listening, or people in our product department. I'm just saying these are things. It's moved along in huge leaps and bounds. I mean, Tony, you were saying in the time you've done it, you've seen huge changes.
We had a smoke machine one year at Bedbury. It was down in the fire garden beneath a little hedge arch, and the idea was it create some smoke in the fire garden, but the wind obviously blew it in the complete opposite direction. But what we did get is up in the top side of site, it was, there was a bit of a mist everywhere that really complemented the lighting.
Fair enough. Happy accidents. Tell you, I've built a career on them. Brilliant. So that we're kind of sort of come to the end of our session. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for our live audience. Graham, thank you again for your help putting it all together. Always appreciated. So thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you for everyone who has joined us for the session. Just sort of ramp it up. There we go. Let's ramp it up a little bit for the grand finale. So our next event is back in January, 7th of January will be our next Light Bytes. Same again, it'll be live in person and a streamed event unless, something goes horribly wrong with a variant somewhere. But fingers crossed, all being well, we'll be back on the 7th of January. So please have a wonderful festive season. Look after yourselves, stay safe, keep healthy, and thank you very much for joining us for all our sessions through the year. And we look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Thank you again to my panel, Tom, Dom, Tony. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.